My name is Harper Quinn, and I'm 62 years old. Retired for 2 years now. I've always preferred quiet mornings, the kind where sunlight slips lazily through the blinds and the kitchen smells faintly of coffee and wood polish. I never imagined that a Saturday like this would shatter the rhythm I'd built for myself. I was barefoot in the kitchen, kettle half filled with water, when I noticed it. A crumpled scrap of yellow notepad paper lying on the counter, edges bent, handwriting jagged and hurried. My pulse quickened before I even recognized the name scrawled at the top, the daughter. I picked it up carefully, as if touching it could undo whatever misfortune had been written there. The words hit me like a cold gust through an open window. Sorry, Mom. No space for you now. My in-laws need your room. No explanation. No apology. Just that. My eyes traced the jagged letters again and again, hoping for some hidden meaning. Some reason that would make sense. None came. I stood frozen, the warmth of the morning sun doing nothing to chase the chill that had settled over my chest. Outside, the neighborhood hummed as if nothing had changed, but in my kitchen, everything had. I felt the familiar pulse of my home, the hardwood floors, the photos on the wall, the faint scent of lavender from the windowsill shift into something foreign, something I no longer belonged to. My fingers clenched the note. My daughter's handwriting, once neat and careful, now felt like a stranger's. I folded it, tucked it into my pocket, and stepped back, letting the silence stretch between the walls I'd called mine for decades. And then I heard the car engine start outside, and the soft, measured footsteps of people moving toward the driveway. My world tilted, and I realized the next chapter had already begun. I stepped onto the porch just as the engine of my daughter's SUV rumbled to life. Sunlight bounced off the silver hood, making the car seem almost unreal, like a scene I wasn't meant to be part of. My daughter, Claire, sat in the driver's seat, her posture stiff, hands gripping the wheel as if the road ahead demanded every ounce of her attention. In the passenger seat, her husband's mother smiled politely, adjusting her scarf, while her father leaned back, arms crossed, surveying the neighborhood as though it belonged to him. I froze, clutching the crumpled note in my hand, feeling its edges bite into my palm. They hadn't looked back, not once. No wave, no smile, no hint that they even noticed I was standing there. My own daughter, the girl I had raised, who once clung to me for comfort on stormy nights, had slipped into a world where I no longer existed. The garage door ground shut behind them, and the tires crunched over the driveway. I could hear the faint click of seatbelts, the low hum of a radio, and then the car slid down the street, carrying away the life I thought I still shared with her. I stood there, shoulders heavy, the wind tugging at my shawl, trying to catch my breath. The house behind me felt silent in a way it never had before. Every floorboard, every picture frame, every corner that carried years of my presence now seemed like evidence of my absence. I pressed my palm to the doorframe, letting the warmth of the wood remind me of the life I had built here, the years I had poured into it, and the child I had loved without hesitation. And yet, in that quiet moment, I understood the world had moved on without me, and I had no choice but to step forward, even if I wasn't ready. Chapter 3. Memories of Sacrifice. I sank into the kitchen chair, the morning sunlight falling across the table where I used to sit with Claire, her small hands clutching crayons as she colored inside impossible lines. My mind drifted back to the early years, the nights I stayed awake, balancing bills while she slept soundly in the next room. Her father had died suddenly, an aneurysm that stole him in one cruel afternoon when she was only 8. I had been alone with a child, a mortgage, and a life that refused to pause. I remember the way she would cling to me after the funeral, tiny fists gripping the fabric of my coat, eyes brimming with confusion and fear. Everyone said boys needed their fathers, but girls did too. And she had me, and I had no choice but to become both mother and father, nurse and guide, provider and protector. I worked late into the nights, poring over spreadsheets and calculations, skipping lunches and errands, just to keep us afloat. Every paycheck was measured, every expense debated in my head, so that she would never know hunger or want. I remember the laughter, the rare, bright moments when the world seemed right. Weekends spent at the local park. Baking experiments that usually ended in disaster, but always in sticky joy. And those quiet evenings, reading books together, her head against my shoulder, trusting me to hold her safe. And I remember the sacrifices, vacations postponed, dreams deferred, nights alone filled with exhaustion and silent worry. I missed friendships, opportunities, and even my own fleeting desires, because raising her required every ounce of attention and energy I could muster. Yet here I was, decades later, holding a crumpled note that made all that invisible. Every hour of care, every sleepless night, every calculation that kept her life steady, it was as if it had been meaningless in her eyes. I felt a quiet frustration rise inside me, mingled with pride for all I had managed to give her despite the loneliness, despite the struggle. I traced my fingers along the edge of the note. The paper crumpled and uneven, and whispered to myself that love alone does not guarantee respect, that devotion is not always recognized. The kitchen, once filled with memories of laughter and learning, now echoed with absence, reminding me that the next chapter had already begun, whether I was ready or not. Over the years, the changes had been almost imperceptible at first. Claire stopped calling me Mom in front of others, slipping instead into a clipped Harper as if I were a colleague rather than the person who had raised her. Invitations to dinner grew fewer, always phrased as polite suggestions rather than expected family time. The house I had built with care and love became a place where I existed only on the periphery. Thanksgiving last year had been the starkest example. I had spent hours in the kitchen preparing Claire's favorite dishes, honey-glazed ham, scalloped potatoes, and my mother's molasses rolls. I had set the table carefully, every napkin folded just right, plates polished, candles lit. The aroma filled the house, a comforting signal of tradition and care. Claire smiled politely, but it was Alana, her mother-in-law, who received the thanks. I stood to the side, holding the gravy boat, a silent observer to the ritual that should have been ours. Her father-in-law commented on the decor. Her husband nodded along, and I realized that the heart of the gathering no longer included me. My presence was acknowledged but invisible, a guest in a house I had once owned in spirit as well as in deed. It wasn't just the holidays. Small, everyday moments carried the same sting. Claire's phone calls became shorter, filled with excuses or delays. She deferred decisions about family events to Alana, even those that had always been private between mother and daughter. I began noticing the little things, the way my advice was brushed aside, the way my voice seemed to echo without being heard. Standing in the quiet of my kitchen one evening, the scent of the molasses rolls lingering in the air, I felt the weight of years of love being met with indifference. The realization settled slowly but firmly. I had been replaced long before the note arrived. The pattern of exclusion had been building for years, and patience had finally run its course, leaving only the clarity of what I needed to do next. I sat at the kitchen table, the crumpled note still folded in my pocket, and began to think through the years in concrete numbers. Gifts, loans, daycare payments. The mortgage help I had quietly provided, all of it added up in my mind. A ledger of love I hadn't expected to be questioned. The first was the down payment I had given for Claire's apartment when she moved back after college. A sum I had quietly saved for months, sacrificing small pleasures and personal needs. Then there were the monthly daycare payments when her child was born, the grocery bills I had picked up so she and Alana could focus on work, the emergency car repairs I had covered without ever asking for acknowledgement. $900 here, $2,000 there, until the sum felt impossibly large. I added the nights I had watched their daughter without notice, evenings when my own comfort was set aside so that Claire could have freedom and Alana could run errands or appointments. I calculated the hours, late nights, early mornings, weekends spent juggling their schedule with mine, and realized I had contributed nearly 200 extra days of labor over the years, a kind of invisible workforce built from love and patience. And yet, here I was, replaced by the very people who had benefited from it all. The ledger of generosity, instead of being recognized, seemed to mark me as dispensable, an accessory to a household that had once been ours. A quiet anger rose within me, tempered by clarity. Each dollar, each hour, each sacrifice was not just a measure of devotion, but also proof of the imbalance. I had given without hesitation, expecting love in return, not permission to be sidelined. I pressed my palm to the folded note in my pocket, feeling the crease dig into my skin. For the first time in years, I understood that acknowledgement was not coming. If I wanted respect, if I wanted control of the life I had built, I would have to claim it myself. The numbers were no longer just numbers, they were the foundation for the decision I was about to make, and the first steps toward reclaiming what was mine. After counting the cost, I needed to see the facts in black and white. I went upstairs to my office, a small, sunlit room filled with shelves of neatly labeled folders, the remnants of decades spent organizing bills, tax documents, and receipts. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled the file labeled House and Contributions. Inside were decades of records, the deed to 1835 Sycamore Lane, notarized and pristine, every property tax statement paid in full, receipts for repairs I had funded, wire transfers for Claire's apartment, daycare invoices, and even notes I had kept on hours spent babysitting. Each page was a reminder that my investment in this family had been tangible, precise, and meticulously documented. I pulled out the HOA bylaws I had once studied casually, noting the clause about occupancy. Non-family residents required written approval, and no signatures for Alana's parents were anywhere to be found. That small oversight suddenly felt like leverage. I could assert my authority without confrontation, legally and fairly. I spread the papers across the desk, feeling a strange heat of control settle in my chest. The weight of helplessness I had carried for weeks lifted slightly. For the first time, I could see the path forward. Every contribution I had made, every sacrifice I had counted in the previous hours, was a tool not just evidence of love, but proof of authority and entitlement. I sat back in the chair, folding the deed carefully, and let myself imagine what action could look like. I didn't rush to anger. I didn't think about confrontation. I thought about precision, about timing, about reclaiming what had always been mine. The quiet power I had accumulated through diligence, patience, and care was finally mine to wield. A single, calm thought settled over me: if I wanted respect, I could enforce it. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with the careful, deliberate use of what I already owned. My next moves had to be exact, my strategy clear. And in that realization, I felt a surge of determination I hadn't known I still possessed. I spent the afternoon sorting through every folder, every receipt, every note I had ever kept related to Claire. The house and the household contributions. Each page became a piece of a puzzle, and for the first time, the edges aligned. I stacked the papers into neat piles, deed and property documents in one, financial contributions in another, HOA regulations and bylaws in a third. The methodical act of organizing calmed my racing thoughts. Once the piles were in order, I called Nora Sandoval, my next-door neighbor and longtime friend. Her calm voice was a balm as I explained the situation. Though I didn't reveal all of my plans, she listened, asked pointed questions, and nodded in a way that made me realize she understood without judgment. "Harper," she said gently, "you've been patient for years. Don't let anyone erase that. You have everything you need to protect yourself legally and clearly." Her words were a quiet affirmation. I could feel the determination solidifying inside me. It wasn't about revenge, at least not in the way the movies showed. It was about precision, about reclaiming what was mine and drawing the line between generosity and exploitation. I created a list of steps, starting with confirming that the in-laws' names had never been added to the HOA records, followed by cross-referencing all payments and transfers I had made over the years. I marked each item with a colored sticky note, highlighting areas that could serve as leverage. Next, I planned to secure the assistance of Susan Barlow, a local realtor who had handled my refinancing years ago and knew the property intimately. As I laid out the plan, I felt a strange sense of calm clarity. Every detail, every document, every carefully preserved receipt was a tool. I had spent decades building a life and a home, and now I was prepared to defend it with the same careful attention I had given to everything else. The house, the history, the sacrifices, they weren't going to be ignored anymore. By evening, I had the blueprint complete. The steps were clear, the timeline set, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the stirrings of control. The next morning, I would begin the quiet work of reclaiming not just a house, but the life and dignity that had always belonged to me. The next morning, I called Susan Barlow, the realtor I had trusted for years. Her voice was brisk but steady, as I explained that the house was going on the market immediately. She asked a few routine questions, glanced at her calendar, and then confirmed she could have photographers and staging ready within the day. My heart thumped, but I didn't feel fear, only focus. I logged into the HOA portal and submitted a formal revocation of occupancy for anyone not listed as family, citing the section of the bylaws I had studied the day before. The confirmation pinged back within minutes. Alana's parents were no longer authorized occupants. Every step I took was precise, deliberate, and legal. There was no shouting, no confrontation, just the quiet assertion of facts and rules. By mid-afternoon, Susan arrived with the photographer and a stager. I walked through each room with calm attention, noting angles, lighting, and the placement of furniture. The home I had built with decades of care and love now became a tool of authority, a statement that my ownership and my decisions could not be ignored. Later, I caught a glimpse of Claire through the window as she returned from errands. She froze when she saw the moving crew and the stager arranging the rooms, her lips pressed together. For the first time, I sensed unease in her carefully curated composure. The message was clear. Even without a word, this was no longer her domain to control. I spent the rest of the afternoon compiling the receipts, bank transfers, and HOA documents into a single folder I labeled House Support and Ownership. Each page represented years of diligence, care, and contribution. I stacked it neatly on the dining table and stepped back, Standing in the sunlight that streamed through the east-facing windows, I felt a calm satisfaction settle over me. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what had been built, earned, and maintained through a lifetime of effort. The house, the history, the sacrifices, all of it was mine to protect. And now, anyone who thought otherwise would realize the cost of underestimating me. The day of the meeting arrived, crisp and clear, the kind of spring morning that made the light in the room feel sharper, more revealing. I carried the folder I had prepared, the neatly organized stack of notarized deeds, receipts, wire transfers, and HOA documents into the Oak Ridge HOA Community Hall. The space smelled faintly of polished wood and old carpet, the kind of place where decisions were made and lines were drawn. Claire arrived first, her posture rigid, lips pressed into a thin line. Alana and her parents followed, moving with a measured precision that spoke of rehearsed calm. None of them met my eyes. They had no idea, no comprehension of the quiet preparation that had brought me here. I laid the folder on the long table, opening it to the first page, the deed, notarized, clearly dated in my name alone. Next, the gift letters documenting the years of financial support, followed by HOA records showing the revocation of unauthorized occupants. Every page was labeled, tabbed, and impossible to dispute. Susan Barlow, the realtor, nodded once and sat beside me, ready to reference property details if needed. The HOA chair, Don Trevors, adjusted his glasses and glanced at the documents, acknowledging their legitimacy. I felt the weight of the years settle into a quiet authority. Claire cleared her throat. Harper, we think I raised a hand, calm but firm. Everything you need is right here. The deed, the gift letters, the HOA filings, legally, financially, and formally. This house is mine. You and your parents are guests at my discretion. Alana shifted in her seat, her smile tight, her hands gripping her folder. Her parents exchanged a glance, unease creeping into their careful composure. The air was taut, every unspoken word carrying the weight of acknowledgement. They had no leverage here, no claim to challenge the facts laid out clearly before them. I closed the folder gently, letting the finality settle. The room was silent except for the subtle shuffle of papers and restrained breathing. Authority, calm and indisputable, radiated from the neat stacks in front of me. This was not dramatics. This was clarity. This was validation. And for the first time in years, I felt the quiet satisfaction of being fully seen, fully recognized, and fully in control. The check arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, its crisp edges a tangible confirmation of the life I had reclaimed. $547,000 net proceeds, free of disputes, unencumbered. I held it in my hands and felt a weight lift. Years of tension and quiet resentment melting into calm clarity. I placed the folder of documents on the desk, each page a testament to diligence, sacrifice, and preparation. The house had been more than wood and stone. It had been my labor, my history, my life. And now, with the sale complete, I finally felt the freedom that had been absent for far too long. In a small moment of symbolic closure, I opened a drawer and retrieved a keychain engraved with 1835. Never again. The numbers reminded me of the property, the years, the perseverance, and the lessons learned. I clipped it onto my bag, a silent promise to myself that I would never allow my boundaries to be overlooked again. Sitting by the window with a cup of tea, I watched sunlight spill over the street, illuminating the neighborhood I had loved and nurtured for decades. I wasn't celebrating vengeance, I was honoring independence, clarity, and self-respect. Every breath I took felt lighter, every thought clearer. The years of devotion, the quiet sacrifices, and the meticulous preparation had all led to this, a life on my terms, unshaken by betrayal, defined by the dignity I refused to relinquish.